So I'm Doug Askman. I'm a history professor here at HPU, and I specialize in the Hawaiian Kingdom history. And I think our presentation today is going to be about Hawaiian monarchs, and then also connecting the monarchs to some of the sites that we have on Oahu. As many as possible will be in our campus area as well, to try to connect our history with our campus. And so I'll just give a couple of seconds of background, and then we'll start our presentation with our images. So there were 8 monarchs of the Hawaiian Kingdom. And so I'll just take a second to sort of describe what happened before the unified monarchy. So we think probably around 1200 or maybe 1250 or so, the first people came to Hawaii from central Polynesia, probably the Marquesas Islands. There's been a long debate about exactly when that happened, but the most recent sort of research indicates that it was later than people used to think, maybe around 1200 or 1250. And for several hundred years after that, the islands were divided. So there wasn't one monarchy. There were different chiefs on different islands. Pretty early on, though, there was an effort by some of those ali'i, or nobles, to try to unify all of the islands. And the person who was able to do that, finally able to do that at the beginning of the 19th century, end of the 18th century, is Kamehameha I. So I'm going to go ahead and put up a picture. So should I go ahead and share my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's see if we can do that. Okay. I got a little thing popping up that says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Just one moment. You
Okay.
shouldn't be the case, but now try.
Okay, looks like that's going to work. And we want to share. Okay. Okay. So can you see my screen there with the image of Kamehameha I?
Yes.
Okay, great. So this is the first monarch of the unified Hawaiian Kingdom. This is Kamehameha I. And all of the pictures that you're going to see of the monarchs, these are the paintings that are in Iolani Palace. So in the palace, there are actually images of all of the Hawaiian monarchs. And Kamehameha Dynasty and King Lunalilo, they are in the Grand Hall. So the palace paintings kind of give us a pictorial image of the Hawaiian monarchy. So this is Kamehameha I. He's probably most famous for unifying the islands. So that process was already going on by the time that Captain Cook came. So that's 1778. He was the first Westerner that we know for sure came to Hawaii. There is speculation that maybe other people like the Spanish came before, but we don't have any definitive proof about that. But we do know that Cook was the first, and already at that time, this unification process has begun. And you may have heard of the Battle of Nu'uanu, the Battle of Nu'uanu-Pali. That was one of the most important battles in the unification of the islands, and that is when Kamehameha I, who was from Hawaii Island and unified Hawaii Island, and then continued his conquests to the other islands, 1795 at the Battle of Nu'uanu, he conquered Oahu. And after that, there were still 2 islands that were unconquered, and those were Kauai and Ni'ihau. And although Kamehameha I tried to use military force to conquer both of those islands, it didn't work. There were a couple of reasons for that, weather, disease, and such. So in 1810, Kamehameha I made a deal with the king of Kauai to bring Kauai into the kingdom as kind of a subordinate kingdom. And so that completed the unification process in 1810 when Kamehameha unified all the islands, but still Kauai and Ni'ihau had a kind of a separate status, and that was something they were actually very proud of. And I'll talk about that in just a few minutes when we talk about some of the connections between Kamehameha and sites in Honolulu. So his most important accomplishment was the unification of the kingdom, and then after the wars to reestablish prosperity and economic productivity. So I want to connect Kamehameha I to some sites that we can see downtown and then beyond as well. One of the things you'll notice in the painting is already the beginning of what we might call hybridization, a mixing of traditional Hawaiian culture with new outside influences. So this painting that you can see shows Kamehameha I wearing Western clothes, and sometimes people are kind of surprised about that, but Western influences were already coming, but you can also see the continuation of traditional emblems and such, because he's wearing an ahu'ula, or a feather cape. That was an ancient symbol of royal power. And so you can see that kind of interesting mix in this painting. And we can also see that cape again if we look at some images. So probably the most famous item or site associated with Kamehameha I in our campus area is right on King Street. So I'm going to go ahead and put up that picture. This is the statue of Kamehameha I, which is in front of the Judiciary Building, which is also called the Li'io Lanehale. This building was built not during Kamehameha I's time, but toward the end of the Kamehameha dynasty, and wasn't finished actually until a couple years after the Kamehameha dynasty ended. But that building was used as the Parliament House and also Supreme Court. And our Supreme Court is still actually in that building today. And this statue was put in front of the building in 1883. So that statue has been around for a very long time. It's probably the most famous statue in Hawaii. So normally when you go there, you'll see busloads of tourists taking pictures of it. So the interesting thing, you can see in the statue here, again, a combination of Western and traditional Hawaiian. So the posing and such is sort of like maybe a Roman emperor, but the clothes you can see are traditional Hawaiian clothes. And the statue itself has a very interesting history. It was designed by an American sculptor who was living in Italy, and the sculpture was actually cast in France. And so that statue that we can see there is actually was made in Europe, was made in France, and then shipped from Germany. And back in the 19th century, if you were trying to get from Europe to Hawaii, you'd have to go around the tip of South America. So this statue was on a ship. It went around the tip of South America. And if you know your geography, that's kind of close to the Falkland Islands. And it's a very dangerous area for ships. And while the ship was making the journey from Europe to Hawaii, there was a fire and some other problems, and the statue fell off the ship. So the statue was actually lost near the Falkland Islands off the coasts of South America. So then how does it end up here in front of this building? So what happened was the statue was insured. And so the insurance money paid for this statue, which is a duplicate of the original. So in 1883, this was in association with the coronation of King Kalakaua. The statue was unveiled here in front of the Judiciary Building. But what happened to the first statue? So it did fall off the ship and it was damaged, but it was actually located again. So it washed up on shore, and a British ship captain was able to acquire it. He brought it to Hawaii, and it was sold to the Hawaiian government. So now you have two statues. You have this statue here, which is the second statue, but you still have the original statue. So This is not in our neighborhood, but I did want to show you this image here. This is where the original statue is. So this is on the island of Hawaii, the northern part near where Kamehameha was from, and it was put in front of the old courthouse there. So this is actually the original statue. You'll notice that it's kind of different because it's colored. Part of the reason for that was the statue, when it fell off the ship, was kind of damaged. So they colored it to try to, I guess, mitigate some of the damaged appearance of the statue. So this is actually the original statue, which is on Hawaii Island. Then the statue that's in front of our downtown Supreme Court building is the second statue. And then a third statue was actually made much later. It was taken from the Honolulu statue, using that one as a mold. And I'll show you that statue here. You probably can't see where this is from in the photograph, but this is in the US Capitol building. So every state gets to have two statues, and Hawaii has two, and one of them is Kamehameha I. And so this is in, I think, near the visitor center. This is one of the heaviest statues, actually, of all the states. There are 100 statues. So this one has to be securely put in an area that can support its very high weight. And so the third statue is in Washington, D.C. And by the way, if you're wondering what Hawaii's other statue is, it is Father, or now Saint Damien. So he's our other statue in Washington. But there is still another statue. I'll just mention one more. It's not an exact duplicate of the first three, but I'll show you that image here. This is in Hilo. This was a statue that was made in the 1960s, and it looks similar to the originals, but is a little bit different. And it was actually made for the Princeville Resort Corporation on Kauai to be put in front of their hotel there, but they decided not to put it up. And the reason for that is kind of what we were talking about earlier. Kauai was never conquered. So Kauai was unified with the rest of the kingdom by Kamehameha through diplomacy rather than war. And so on Kauai, they did not want to have a statue of Kamehameha. So the statue was in storage for decades. And then in the 1990s, about 1997, I think, Kamehameha schools helped to put this statue up in Hilo. So Hawaii Island is where Kamehameha is from. So now this statue stands near Hilo Bay. So it's an interesting story about not only Kamehameha's conquest, but about Kauai feeling very proud that they never were conquered. Okay, so that's certainly something for you to see. If you're in the downtown area, you can see the statue of Kamehameha I. So when Kamehameha I died, he was succeeded by his son. So he had a number of different children, and this was the oldest son of his sacred wife. So in the ancient Hawaiian system, especially Ali'i would have had multiple wives. And this is Liholiho, also known as Kamehameha II. And so Liholiho, again, you can see here Western influences. He is wearing Western clothes. And one of the things that Liholiho did was to take a trip. So I'll just tell you one story about Liholiho. He didn't rule for very long. So he became king when he was in his early 20s. With the arrival of Westerners came a lot of diseases. And so Liholiho actually did only live to be about 27 or so. And at the end of his reign, one of the things he wanted to do, is Hawaii now is connected with other countries around the world, is he wanted to take a trip. So Liholiho went to London. And this painting was actually based on some images that were done of him while he was in Europe. So he was going to meet the King of England. He was going to deal with relations between Hawaii and England as well. But while he was in England, he died. He died of a Western disease for which Hawaiians would have not had much immunity, and that was measles. So Westerners would usually survive these diseases because of immunity, but Hawaiians don't have that immunity and ended up dying in very large numbers from diseases that were introduced by outsiders. So he died in England at a fairly young age, in his 20s, and his body was brought back to Hawaii. I'm going to show you an image associated with our neighborhood, so to speak, that connects that. He traveled to England with one of his wives, and I'll show you her picture here as well. This is Malu, and she, as you can see here, again, Western influences. This painting was done from images that were done while they were in Europe. She also died on the trip, also of the measles. And so again, you can see the diseases had a very strong impact on Hawaiians. So what are a couple of places I want to try to connect Kamehameha II to our downtown area? So here, I'm not sure if you recognize this spot. This is on the grounds of Iolani Palace. This is on the State Library side, so this is close to Punch Bowl Street. And what this shows you here is the site of the first royal mausoleum. So as Western influences were growing, things like Western burial practices became important in Hawaii. So Liholiho's body came back from England. It took a long time. It came on a ship. And a Western-style mausoleum was built on what is today the grounds of Iolani Palace. At that time, the palace wasn't built yet, but this was an important site for the Ali'i. So it was a Western-style building. It was made out of coral, actually, as many of the early Western-style buildings in Hawaii were made out of coral, because we didn't have stone like they would have had in other places. So the Royal Mausoleum building was torn down actually in the middle, a little bit after the middle of the 19th century, when a new, much more impressive Royal Mausoleum was put up in Nu'uanu. It's a couple of miles from the HPU campus. It's probably a little, you could theoretically walk, but it's certainly a place that maybe you could take a bus or drive, or maybe even walk to take a look at it. And at that time, this old mausoleum was torn down, but you can still see that the spot is marked. There is a mound. This was put up later in the 19th century to commemorate the site of where the first royal mausoleum was. And that was built initially for holding the bodies of Kamehameha II and Malu, his favorite wife, after their remains were returned from England. And other monarchs were buried there also, and other ali'i or nobles were buried there until the new mausoleum was completed. Now, there's a second site I want to connect to Kamehameha II. It's a little bit indirect, but I think it is important. And this is the Mission House. So this is the so-called frame house. This is on King Street, about a block and a half or so, a block or so from Punch Bowl Street. So in between Punch Bowl Street and South Street. So kind of close to our waterfront area, waterfront plaza area. This house is the oldest Western house in Hawaii. It was actually shipped on a boat from Boston, Massachusetts as a kit. So when American missionaries came, they first came during the reign of Kamehameha II. So that's our connection to Kamehameha II. We see the introduction of Western missionaries. He gave them a place to stay. He wasn't really sure whether it was a good idea for them to stay. They had a probation actually for 1 year, and then finally were given permanent legal status to stay in the kingdom. And so they built a frame house here. So this is the oldest house in Hawaii, Western style house from the 1820s, early 1820s. And again, I think the neat thing about this is it was shipped in a box from Boston and then put up as a kit house. And one of the things you'll notice about it is it has tiny windows. So those little windows are kind of New England style for the cold winters. So when the American missionaries were, some of them were living there, it was not very pleasant because it's very hot. And they also didn't understand the trade winds. So the house isn't built in a way to pick up the trade winds of the area. So that's another connection to Kamehameha II, because one of the important historical things that happened is the arrival of Western missionaries and eventually the Christianization of the Hawaiian kingdom. Okay, so when Kamehameha II died, he did not have any children. So, and that was another consequence oftentimes of diseases, is that people became sterile, or they were unable to have children, or they had other diseases that uh, precluded them from having offspring. So there's a crisis pretty early on in the Kamehameha dynasty because so few heirs were born. But Liholiho did have, so that's Kamehameha II. He had a younger brother, and he became the next king. So we're going to put his painting up here. This is Kamehameha III. He was also called Koikiaouli. So usually the kings had a personal name and then sort of like a reign name. So Kamehameha I, Kamehameha II, Kamehameha III, but they also had personal names as well. So this is Koikiaouli. He was known as Kamehameha III. And again, you can see the Western influences here. He's wearing this Western style uniform. But not just that, just look at the posing. This would have been very similar to poses that were done for European monarchs or Western leaders during this time. This was a painting done by an American painter who came to Hawaii and painted Kamehameha III, his wife, and some other ali'i as well. So one of the big themes that we see during the reign of Kamehameha III is the westernization or hybridization of Hawaii's government. So while traditional systems like the monarchy continued on, some Western ideas were brought in too, such as creating a constitution based on European and American kind of patterns, but also specifically suited for Hawaii. So that's one of the major developments that we see during the reign of Kamehameha III is a westernization or hybridization, combining traditional Hawaiian techniques for government with Western styles, like having a constitution, a legislature, a Supreme Court, those types of things that we found in other countries. And as Kamehameha III was modernizing Hawaii's government, part of the reason for that was to try to protect Hawaii's independence. So Hawaii was under threat, as were all the islands in the Pacific. European countries especially were interested in gobbling up small places in the Pacific and making colonies. And Kamehameha III was very much, of course, against Hawaii being taken over by other countries. And so part of the reason for creating a government that in many ways looks similar to Western governments was to try to get respect from Western countries so that Hawaii would be seen as an equal and not as an opportunity for European countries to take over Hawaii. In the end, that process was actually fairly successful, and Kamehameha III was able to get treaties with other countries. But there were problems as well. So I'm going to connect those problems a little bit to some sites that we can see in our neighborhood related to Kamehameha III. And one of these, it's about a mile from waterfront, is in Thomas Square. So you might have heard of Thomas Square. This is right by the Blaisdell, kind of in between the Blaisdell and the Honolulu Museum of Art, between Beretania and King Street. And here we can see this park with a statue of Kamehameha III. This statue was just put up about 2 years ago. I think it was in 2018. It's bigger than life size, so it's actually 12 feet tall. And you can see, if you can look carefully there, you can see the words there on the wall area. That's the motto of the Hawaiian Kingdom. And this spot is associated both with Hawaii's motto and also with Hawaii's independence. So I mentioned that Hawaii was under threat from foreign countries. And in the 1840s, Hawaii was actually taken over for a brief period of time by the British as part of their kind of, partly was a misunderstanding, but colonial policies of this time. The British took over Hawaii. Eventually, a high-ranking British naval officer came to investigate what had happened with Hawaii being taken over by the British, and his name was Admiral Thomas. And he examined the situation, and he decided that Hawaii should not be taken over by the British, so he restored Hawaii's independence. And that happened in 1843 at this very site here in Thomas Square, just about a mile from our campus. Admiral Thomas reinstated Hawaii's independence and gave the kingdom back to Kamehameha III. So the park area has been restored to kind of commemorate the restoration of Hawaii's independence. And this spot has actually been named Thomas Square since Kamehameha III's time. It was named to honor him for his restoration of Hawaii's independence. It's the oldest actually public park in Hawaii, dating back to the reign of Kamehameha III. So we can see this enormous statue of the king, as this was the place associated with the restoration of Hawaii's independence. And here's the oops, I hope you get the close-up there. There's a close-up of the statue, so you might look to see some similarities with the painting that we saw. And then also I mentioned the motto. So at Hawaii's independence, the ceremony was conducted at Thomas Square, and then a Thanksgiving service was held at Kauai Ha'o Church. And so let's take a look here. This is Kauai Ha'o Church. This is actually very close to our waterfront location. So this is at the corner of King Street and Punch Bowl Street. This was a church built by Christian missionaries from the United States. It's also made out of coral, finished in 1842. And again, a New England style. It was designed by a missionary from Vermont named Hiram Bingham. And in this church, there was a Thanksgiving service to recognize Hawaii's independence after that short period of British rule. And in that speech that was given in this very church, that's just a couple of blocks from campus, Kamehameha III said the words that became the motto of the Hawaiian kingdom, and actually is still the motto of the state of Hawaii today, which is Ua mau ke ea o ka aina I ka pono, which is the life. There are different ways to translate it. I think the official translation is the life of the land is perpetuated in righteousness. So what it means is that it was a right thing for the British. You see the word pono is in there, one of our HPU themes as well. It was a right thing for the British to restore Hawaii back to the kingdom after that period of British occupation. Okay, so let's move to Kamehameha IV. We have a good picture down here. So Kamehameha III also did not have any children. I need to go down here a little bit more. Where's my Kamehameha fourth image? Here's Kamehameha IV. Kamehameha III did not have any children, so he didn't have any surviving legitimate children. It's a little bit complicated, but he had no legal heirs, and so he was succeeded by his nephew. So this is a grandson of Kamehameha I. So the first two kings were both sons of Kamehameha I, and then the second two kings, so Kamehameha IV and Kamehameha V, they were two grandsons of Kamehameha I. So this is Kamehameha IV. He was also called Alexander Liholiho, and he became king upon the death of Kamehameha III. And so he was famous for a couple of things, including, kind of famous, I would think, for his wife, too. So I'm going to show you a picture of her. If I can scroll to the right place here. Here we go. This is his wife. This is Queen Emma. Queen Emma, you've probably heard of her. So Kamehameha IV and Queen Emma helped to set up a hospital. So one of the things that's happening, as I mentioned before, are all the diseases coming in the 19th century. And so Kamehameha IV and Queen Emma wanted to create a special hospital to provide medical service and medical care for especially Native Hawaiians who were poor and sick. And this became our Queen's Hospital, right? So that's also kind of near our campus, or the corner of about Beretania and Punch Bowl Street. The building is not the original building, but it's called the Queen's Medical Center in honor of Queen Emma, the wife of Kamehameha IV, and the two of them helped to raise money to build this hospital. Today, one of the most important hospitals in Hawaii. Another thing that we can mention about Queen Emma, she was the only Hawaiian king or queen who wasn't 100% Hawaiian. So she was a quarter British. She was the granddaughter of a British sailor who actually became an advisor to Kamehameha I, so the first monarch of a unified kingdom, and actually married into the Kamehameha dynasty. So she was the only king or queen who wasn't 100% pure Hawaiian. She was a quarter British. And as I mentioned before, there was always a problem of heirs, right? Kamehameha II had no children. Kamehameha III had no surviving legitimate children either. And when Kamehameha IV had a son, it was a big deal. So I'll show you this picture here. This is their son. This is a photo of Prince Albert Edward. Albert Edward Kaui Keauli Leo Papa Kamehameha, the great hope for the Hawaiian monarchy to have a new prince in the next generation. But very unfortunately, he died at a very young age. So he died at the age of 4, and it was a great loss to the kingdom, to the monarchy, but the Hawaiian people as well, as there was not another heir born to Kamehameha IV. This cute photo shows him as an honorary fireman, so he's company number 4, so you can see the little badge. The shirt, you can't see it in the photo because it's black and white, is red. And some of the things, including some of the clothes that belong to little Prince Albert Edward, are at a site that I want to connect to Kamehameha IV. It's not too close to our campus, but it's not too far. It's the Queen Emma Summer Palace. So this is on the way if you're headed over between the Hawaii Loa campus or Windward campus and downtown. I think sometimes the shuttle bus goes by here on the Pali Highway. So this was a private home. It wasn't an official palace. It's called the Summer Palace today. But this home was acquired by Queen Emma's family. Kind of like the mission houses, it was sent in a box. So it was a kit house from Boston, sent around South America, and then set up in Hawaii, eventually acquired by Kamehameha IV and Queen Emma from one of her relatives. And today it is a museum, so you can go and visit it. I won't talk too much about the interior, but we'll just show you some pictures of some of the cool stuff that you can see. If you go to the Queen Emma Summer Palace, you can see those kahili. Those are feather standards that are ancient symbols of Hawaiian royalty. You can see lots of 19th century furniture. I will just show you here this very cool photo showing the little cradle. So this is a little cradle, beautiful cradle. You can see it looks like waves on the ocean here. This is the cradle for the little Prince Albert Edward, who died tragically at the age of 4. So that's a place that you might be interested in taking a look at if you are on campus. Here's the last. I'll just show you one more picture of the inside of it. This is a room that was built for a special visit by Queen Victoria of Great Britain. One of her sons came, the Duke of Edinburgh, and the special room was added to the palace. Okay, so since Kamehameha IV didn't have any children, he did have a brother. So there was an heir to the throne, but we're running out of heirs. This is Prince Lota, or Prince Lot Kamehameha, also known as Kamehameha V. And so I'm just going to mention one of the things that he was kind of famous for, and that is being a builder. So he wanted to build buildings, especially government buildings, to symbolize that Hawaii was a modern nation and should be respected. So he actually was the one who ordered the construction of the building behind the Kamehameha statue. This is the Supreme Court building today. It held originally the Supreme Court and also the Parliament of the Hawaiian Kingdom. It started under his rule, but it wasn't actually finished until after he died. But I'm going to give you a close-up here. You can see here, if you can see the wording here, it says Kamehameha Elima Ka Mo'i, which is Kamehameha V, the king. So he was the one who ordered the construction of this palace, and sometimes we see him as the builder king because of his interest in building these buildings. And I'll show you a picture of the clock tower. Here again, you can see that's the motto, Ua Maokea Uka Aina Ika Pono. Life of the land is perpetuated in righteousness. Those were the words said by Kamehameha III just down the street at Kawaihao Church. And then the date, 1872, that's when the building started. And that's also the year that Kamehameha V died. So just look at a couple of other buildings that he ordered constructed. This is more towards our Pioneer Plaza area. This is about a block on Bethel Street away from Pioneer Plaza. This is the post office, Kamehameha V Post Office. It was the first post office or dedicated post office building in the Hawaiian Kingdom. It is today a theater. Here we can see the Kapu'aiwa building. Kapu'aiwa was another name for Kamehameha V. This is also close to waterfront. This is at the corner of Punch Bowl and Queen Street, right next to the statue. And this was also built during Kamehameha V's time, at least the left part. The right part was added later. And another building, since we're talking about being a builder king, this is the barracks building on the grounds of Iolani Palace. So this is also built out of coral, as many of the early buildings were. This was held or built to hold the Royal Guard. So this building was built in the style of a kind of like a German, European kind of crusader castle. So you see that interesting mix. You see Hawaiian building resources being coral, built in this European sort of style. This building was about where the state capitol is today. And when the state capitol was built, this building was moved. Actually, it was disassembled, and all the pieces were numbered and labeled, and then reassembled a little ways away. So it is located now on the grounds of Iolani Palace, but was actually originally behind the palace, about where the state capitol is. So that's another indication of being the builder king. And then just one more thing here. This is not too close to campus, but this is at Moanalua Gardens, a little more toward the central, not central Oahu, but a little away from downtown area. This was a cottage that was used by Kamehameha V. So that is also, the inside is not open to the public, but you can visit Moanalua Gardens and take a look at some of the plants. So you can see the kalo, or the taro, the lo'i there in the front. And you can check out this cottage that was used by Kamehameha V. Okay, so Kamehameha V was unmarried. He had no children. And there was a bit of a problem because there were no heirs to the throne. So when Kamehameha V died in 1872, nobody knew who was going to become king. He didn't leave any heirs. There were no children. He had a sister. The sister had died. So according to the Constitution, there was an election. So this man was elected. He was the first elected king of Hawaii. His name was High Chief William Charles Lunalilo, or King Lunalilo. And he was from a collateral line of the Kamehameha dynasty. He was not a direct descendant of Kamehameha I, but he was a descendant of a half-brother. He's not usually considered a direct Kamehameha, but he was related to the family, kind of like a cousin. And he seemed to then solve the crisis, because now we had Hawaii's first elected king. Only problem, he also was unmarried, had no children, had no heirs, and only 13 months after he became king, he also died, leading to another crisis in the succession. And before I tell you what happened there, let's link a site downtown to Lunalilo, and that is his mausoleum. So he's the only ruler who has a tomb downtown. I mentioned the royal mausoleum in Nu'uanu, where all of the kings from Kamehameha II on were buried, except for Lunalilo. So Lunalilo had a special mausoleum constructed in front of Kaiha'o Church. So here we are at the corner of King Street and Punch Bowl Street. He did not want to be buried in the royal mausoleum. He had some issues with the Kamehamehas. He wanted to be buried close to the people. He was called the People's King. So a tomb was built in front of Kaiha'o Church for Lunalilo. And here you can see Lunalilo ka mo'i, Lunalilo the King, 1874, and that is the year he died. So you can check this out if you're in that area. If you ever want to see the inside, you only have a few hours to do that every year. He died at the end of January, and on the Sunday, that's the last Sunday usually in January, the inside of the mausoleum is open for a few hours around the time of the church service at Kaiha'o Church, and you can actually see the tomb. So this is the inside of the mausoleum. This is Lunalilo's tomb is underneath this marble covering.
His father, the chief Kanaina, is over here. And here again, we can see these beautiful kahili, or feather standards, that are ancient symbols of Hawaiian royalty. So if you mark your dates now, maybe January 2021, last Sunday, usually it's the last Sunday, it's announced usually by the church about when you can actually see the inside. So a lot of people will go and see it, but it's only open one day, just for a few hours around the time of the church service near Lunalilo's birthday. Okay, so Lunalilo dies. He has no heirs. There's another crisis, and there's another election. And so this time, we're getting to this last Hawaiian king. This is the High Chief David Lameakala, and he was elected after the death of Lunalilo. So he's Hawaii's second elected monarch. He was not a Kamehameha. He was related to a high-ranking ali'i, or chiefly family, that had supported Kamehameha, but was not himself a Kamehameha. So he did a number of important things. First monarch in the entire world to visit the United States shortly after he became king. He traveled to Washington. Big deal in the newspapers. Thousands of people went to see him, a real-life king in the United States. He also, in 1881, became the first monarch in world history to travel all around the globe. So he went to Asia, he went to Europe, he was briefly in Africa. He was even in Yemen in the Middle East as he was heading over from Asia to Africa and to Europe, North America. First, and it's amazing for a small kingdom like Hawaii, the first ruler in history to travel all around the world was King Kalakaua. It took about 9 months in 1881. And during the time, actually, that he was gone, we can talk about connect. There are a lot of things that connect to him downtown. Just mention a couple. A palace was being built, a new palace. And so this is Iolani Palace downtown. So this is King Street, between Richard Street and Punchbowl Street. This palace was built by Kalakaua as a very important symbol of Hawaii's independence and of its proud history and even of its wealth as well. So we did a whole presentation on that, so I won't go inside too much, but here we can see the beautiful Grand Hall. And those paintings that I've been showing you, they begin in the Grand Hall of the palace. Here we can see something that you might want to see in November, special decorations that are put up for Kalakaua's birthday. These are replicas of his 1886 50th Jubilee celebration. You can see here in the throne room of the palace also a fairly new display. This is a coronation dress. So here we can see the beautiful furniture, the kahili, but Kalakaua also had a very elaborate coronation as well. So here we can see, for instance, a crown. These crowns were made in England for the coronation. Those are on view in the palace. And if you're unable to go inside, you can see a representation of the coronation. If you've ever seen this before, it's sometimes called the bandstand. It's not really a bandstand. It was used by the Royal Hawaiian Band for band performances, but it was built to be a coronation pavilion. The top part is original. The bottom part is not original. The original coronation pavilion was wood, so it has deteriorated, but the ceiling or the roof over it is original. So Kalakaua had his coronation with that crown that I showed you at Iolani Palace in this pavilion. It was not actually in front of the it wasn't in the location where it is now. It was actually in front of the palace, and there was this enormous amphitheater built in front of Iolani Palace that could seat thousands of people for his coronation. That was in 1883, and that actually the unveiling of the Kamehameha statue is connected to his coronation as well. So Kalakaua was a traveler. He was also a builder. He was interested in connecting Hawaii to the rest of the world. And toward the end of his life, as he was sick, he took another trip to the United States. And it was on that trip in January of 1891 that Kalakaua died in San Francisco, California, the second monarch to die overseas. Kamehameha II had died in England, and Kalakaua died in San Francisco. there wasn't as much of a crisis when he died. He did not have any children. No monarchs after Kamehameha I had surviving children. Kamehameha IV had the little boy, but he died. But so this was always a problem, successors to the throne. Kalakaua had a brother. He had died also. He was his first heir. But Kalakaua had a sister, had two sisters, one who was still alive at his death, and she became the last monarch. So Kalakaua was the last king, and he named as his successor his sister. So we will show you this picture here. This is somebody you probably recognize. This is Liliuokalani, Kalakaua's sister. She became the last monarch of the Hawaiian kingdom. So when Kalakaua died, actually nobody in Hawaii knew he died in San Francisco, because back then there was a telegraph, but there was no cable connecting Hawaii to the United States. So Hawaiian people were expecting Kalakaua to return on an American military ship from San Francisco after his visit. And the whole city had been decorated for his return. And instead, they could see the ship coming around Diamond Head all covered in black, and they knew Kalakaua had died. And so he was succeeded on his death by his sister, Liliuokalani, the last monarch of the Hawaiian kingdom. There was a lot of turmoil during her reign. Kalakaua had faced some of this as well. A small group of Westerners, either foreign origin, some of them were born here, so they were Hawaiian Kingdom citizens. They had taken away a lot of power from the Hawaiian monarchy, and Liliuokalani wanted to restore power to the monarchy and to the Hawaiian people as well. Some of the changes that had happened under the influence of these Westerners and Hawaiian Kingdom citizens who were Westerners as well, as they had limited through fairly sneaky means voting for Hawaiians too, for native Hawaiians. So Liliuokalani wanted to change the constitution and bring power back to the monarchy and restore some of the voting rights of the Hawaiian people. And this triggered in 1893 a coup led by those Westerners, a very small group of them. They were assisted by the American diplomatic representative to Hawaii, who was sympathetic to them. American troops were landed in January of 1893. They did not fight, but this led to a huge crisis and the overthrow. It's, you could spend a week talking about this, but in January of 1893, Liliuokalani was overthrown and the monarchy was abolished. But rather than end on a sad note, I do want to end with a place associated with Liliuokalani that's a little bit more positive, and that's also near our campus as well. This is at the corner of Richard Street and Beretania Street. On Beretania Street, this is Washington Place. This is the official residence of the governor of Hawaii. And the connection to Liliuokalani is it was her private home. So her husband was actually American born. His name was John Dominus. His family built this house very early. It's 1847. It's older than Iolani Palace by 35 years almost, about 35 years. But this was Liliuokalani's private home. So she lived here for much of her adult life. And after the overthrow of the monarchy, she also lived here as well. So after she was overthrown, she was imprisoned for a while in Iolani Palace, but after that, she spent her last years here at Washington Place. So there are tours, and you need to make arrangements ahead of time. I just show you a couple of pictures of the building itself. It isn't a place you can walk in since it's the governor's official residence, but there are some things associated with the queen inside, including, again, the kahili, or feather standards that were ancient symbols of royalty. This piano, which was built of koa, that was from Hawaii, of course, and then shipped to the United States to be made into this piano that was given to Liliuokalani for her birthday when she was queen. Here we can also see another room from Washington Place, another kahili, and then also this beautiful chair that looks kind of like a musical clef. Lili'uokalani was very musical and wrote many songs, Aloha Oi, Queen's Prayer, many other pieces of music. And also just show you our final image here. This is in the bedroom. This is Lili'uokalani's bed that was at Washington Place. So it originally had a canopy. You can, if you look really closely in the photo that's on the bench in front of the bed, you can see what it looked like originally. But this is one of the spots that's close to our campus that is closely associated with Lili'uokalani. She died, in fact, at Washington Place in November of 1917. So that brings us to the end of our history of the Hawaiian monarchy and some of the sites, royal sites on Oahu, especially around our campus area. So let me go back up here. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I'm going to go back to you, Kayla.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Doug.
No problem.
We're pretty close to the end, so hopefully in the future we can get some question and answer time, but that was great. I enjoyed it.
Okay.
And then we are set for tomorrow.
Okay.
So I don't know if you want to come to Aloha Tower. And
sure, that will work. Does 1:30 work for you?
Yep, 1:30 is great.
Okay.
I've got a student, her name is Carly, so if any of them you want to be interactive, we're going to send her along, and then Zach will go with you as well to do the filming.
Okay, so where should I meet you at Aloha Tower?
Do you know where the Star of Honolulu offices were? On the boat docks?
Last time yes, because the last time I was there, I didn't know they were closed. Well, I guess they are closed now.
Yep.
But yes, over on the Falls of Clyde side.
Yep, so that office we have now taken over for university relations in the interim because Star of Honolulu vacated it.
Okay.
And our department shared an office, or was in an office up at the bank that shared airflow with the bank. So with COVID, we've taken over that space for now.
Okay.
So if you want to go ahead and meet us there.
Okay.
Just, I would say go ahead and pull into the parking lot up front. I'll make sure we take care of your parking.
Okay, I am going to probably actually walk from Waterfront.
Well, that works too.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. So I will be there 1:30 tomorrow.
Let me ask this. Is it easier based on the places you want to go for them to meet you at Waterfront? So that you're closer to what's best
we could do that. So I guess it's gonna kind of depend. I don't know how long it'll take because I've never done this before. Mm-hmm. But the routes, there were 3 kind of routes that I was thinking of. One route would be those items that are kind of close to Waterfront. So those I think would be moving from Waterfront up to King Street. Mm-hmm. And then the second route would be on King Street. So you could go directly from there down towards Fort Street, and then maybe the last portion would be from Fort Street down to Aloha Tower. So maybe, I don't think it has to be filmed in any particular order, since I guess it can be kind of.
Well, why don't I have them meet you at Waterfront?
Okay, and then maybe we can end at Aloha Tower.
Yeah.
And then they could just stop there.
So maybe meet outside the Student Services Center?
Sure. Okay, that works. Yeah, that'll be fine. Okay, so we'll meet in front of Student Services at 1:30 tomorrow.
Yep.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry about the little delay at the beginning of the technical problems.
We got it figured out. Next time maybe we just log in a little earlier and make sure we're good. So
yeah, I tried to log in earlier, but I couldn't because I was having so much trouble with the computer. It wouldn't log on. So I knew that there was going to be trouble. I thought, oh no, because I tried to log on at like 10:45. I'm like, what's going on? But I'm glad we got it straightened out, and then I'll see you folks at 1:30 in front of Student Services tomorrow.
Yep.
Okay, great.
So thank you, Doug.
Okay, I'll see you tomorrow. Take care.
Once we get through tomorrow, I'll work with you on a schedule for other sessions.
Sounds good. That sounds good.
Awesome. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.